Locker Talk webcast series brought to you by BreachLock, a global leader in offensive security solutions offering continuous attack surface discovery, penetration testing, and red teaming. Hi, I'm Chesbrough, and I will be your host and moderator today. Today's webcast is on third-party and supply chain cybersecurity risks and a practical approach. As organizations grow increasingly interconnected with third-party vendors, partners, and suppliers, their risk exposure widens, creating new vulnerabilities across the supply chain. Recent high-profile incidents have demonstrated how a single weak link can have wide-reaching impact, emphasizing the need for robust, proactive strategies to manage these risks. During this webcast, we will explore why supply chain security will be more important than ever as we move into 2025. We'll get into the mind of a hacker and how they view the weaknesses in the supply chain, and we'll discuss practical approaches for strengthening third-party defenses, helping you to build resilience and safeguard critical business operations. Before I introduce our guest speakers and experts, I'd like to go over just a few logistics. If you have any questions during the discussion, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try to answer them. We will also take some time at the end of the webcast to take questions from our audience. And lastly, today's webcast is being recorded and will be made available on demand at breachlock.com after this live airing. And now I'm excited to introduce our guest speakers. Our first speaker is Seemant Sehgal. Seemant is the founder and CEO of BreachLock with over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity. Seemant is an angel investor in early stage startups, an industry leader and member of the Forbes Technology Council, and author of the ISACA Journal. He is also former head of security for ING, one of the world's largest banks. Welcome, Seemant. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Ann.
Our next guest is Joe Sullivan. Joe is a senior analyst at Tag Infosphere with a rich background spanning various industry sectors. As a CISO of major global companies like Cloudflare, Uber, and Meta, Joe boasts over 20 years in tech leadership. His previous role as a federal prosecutor, notably in the 9/11 investigation, underscores his legal acumen, including his appointment as a cybersecurity commissioner for former President Obama. Joe also serves in advisory roles with startups like Airbnb and DoorDash, as well as serving on various not-for-profit boards. Welcome, Joe, and thanks for joining us as our guest speaker today. We're pleased to have you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So let's jump in. The first question is for Seemant. Seemant, why will supply chain cybersecurity be more important than ever in 2025?
And I think it gets more important by every year. And the simple answer to that is the attack surface as people defending, our organizations, or even for the hackers, the attack surface has been expanding. And, it had phases in which it was expanding. First, there was a, high degree of IT that was introduced. More digitization came into play. Then there was cloud. Now there's AI. But, what's really happening around all of this is that all of these systems kind of keep on expanding also in your supply chain, right? Because companies are getting more interconnected. That's the simple, the simple point, which I cannot emphasize enough. I mean, BreachLock as a company is connected to probably 20, 25 other organizations that might not be very detrimental to the actual process of pen testing or attack surface management that BreachLock is executing. But in the end, these SaaS softwares that we use, the CRM software and, whatnot, they're all in the end helping BreachLock as a business to deliver the end product to its clients. Now, when I say clients, this could be internal clients, or these could be actual external clients that are paying BreachLock, right? So, that's the simple way to look at it, that it's only going to get more and more important because, the IT landscape is expanding. The companies that work together, the interconnected ecosystem, that's expanding. And, eventually as a result of it, the supply chain becomes a part of your attack surface. So, it's a combined definition now. We can't separate it out. And I know it sounds really weird when you think about that. It's like, okay, fine. Is it like going to be endless? To a certain extent, yes, because it's like a nucleus ecosystem that you're creating. Because the hacks that I've seen lately, they've gone to tier 3, tier 4 suppliers, right? And so where do you stop? I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, we do want to have our eyes everywhere possible as far as there is economic justification for it, right? So that's how I think it's only going to get more important in 2025 and in fact beyond.
Agreed. Thank you, Sam. And Joe, what do you think are some of the inherent challenges in handling supply chain security?
Well, the world has undergone this incredible transformation from a technology standpoint, where, as was suggested, we've moved from kind of like controlling our own destiny. Like if you go back to think of companies that existed 25 years ago at the kind of dawn of the internet age, we were very careful about connectivity between our company and the internet and the rest of the world. We wanted to do everything on our own, in our own data center, with our own hardware, and we had a sense of control. So the security team could think about, okay, what are all the assets? What are all the risks? Very easily. And you had the levers to get in and manage that risk. It's as I guess 2010s kind of came along, a lot of businesses realized technology is moving so fast. We cannot build it all internally. It's more efficient to move outside of our network perimeter, so to speak. And as a result, now, if I go into a 20-person startup to help them with their security, they already have 100 vendors. They already have put some of their sensitive intellectual property and some of their sensitive customer data in third-party environments. And so for the security team, this is an incredibly big challenge, because we have to think about, how do I secure those crown jewels in an environment that I don't control? It's a really big challenge, and you have to think about it from a comprehensive standpoint. Like, do we get the logs that we need to get visibility? Do we have people on our team who understand all these different technologies and environments? It's really hard to do well at scale and consistently.
Agreed. And I think that takes us to the next question, as we look at the need and, the more challenging and complex, attack surface and environment. Seemant, what are some of the cybersecurity tools or technologies and processes that can help strengthen the supply chain?
Well, that's a great question, but it's also a very broad question, right? It's like asking somebody, hey, what are the 10 things you're going to do for cybersecurity, given you've got 100K, 200K, 1 million, 10 million budget, right? So, it's always going to be a cost benefit analysis. We all know there's there's 1,000+ vendors out there that you can choose from, BreachLock being one of them. But, if I had to go really to the bare minimum, right, there's two ways I would look at that problem. Right, I would look at tools on the defense side, and I would look at tools on the offense side. Now, don't get me wrong, if you don't have no defense, there's no point checking your offensive security strategy, right? So, the latter part is obviously for companies that have at least built some kind of security awareness into their system while they were coding a web application. Like Joe said, there's like probably a 20-person startup, and rightly so, who's created the SaaS application that works wonders for their clients, and maybe one day they'd be, a $1 billion firm. We've seen examples of that in the past, but given when they're starting, they have to be able to have at least basic security awareness, and that's where offensive security can be put to use. Of course, for larger companies, they need to go into continuous penetration testing, continuous red teaming, attack surface management. And on the defense side, it's basically very simple. You can't improve what you can't measure, right? So they need to be able to measure how their defenses are performing. That's also where offensive security can come into play for a larger organization. And I think on the defense side, we all know what's the basic hygiene. You need to have a endpoint security solution. You need to have your perimeter secured, you need to have cloud visibility, you need to have multi-cloud visibility, and there's a large amount of solutions that are out there. So basically, I'd break it down into two buckets, right? If you have only an application, if you only have an application, like a SaaS application, you're a 20 people startup that's building that, you got to have a WAF, you got to have security awareness when you are coding the applications, and it will not hurt you to run a $10,000 penetration test. You can afford that because it'll save you dollars in terms of getting out of an incident or compromising a large value contract that might be coming your way. And if you're a large company, you could still use offensive security to measure the effectiveness of your defense controls. And the second bucket would be, if you've got a ton of money to invest, then just go through all the basic hygiene checks that you would want. Again, endpoint security, securing your parameters, so on and so forth. And what I've seen is like the larger enterprises, and largely so, they are more focused on detection controls. I don't know if that's right or wrong. I've been part of large banks as well, and we spend a fortune on detecting incidents that probably are never detected, or you detect some incidents that when you investigate, you find out they were change tickets that somebody forgot to register a change for. And practically speaking, this is what I've seen. And I'm not saying that these solutions are not effective, but I've worked 20 years in this industry. I've still not seen the needle in the haystack problem going away for a very large enterprise with 40 locations, 50,000 employees, 3,000 partners. That's a lot of data to process and try and find that one sneaky hacker that's getting in. And that's why, being an offensive security professional, I always say that if you balance your money between defense and offense, you're at least going to be able to see, hey, one, that's where I'm leaking money, so I need to plug that in terms of defense investments. And two, hey, I forgot to put that plug on. That's completely missing and open to hackers, so I need to put something there. So in either case, it's a win-win. If you are leaning on offensive security, whether you're a small player or you're already investing $50 million in your defense budget, either case, it's a win.
Yeah, thank you, Seemant. And Joe, I see you nodding your head there. It's about that balance of defensive and, offensive. Wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, the way I think about it is we have to, and I don't think we've gotten there yet, we have to, on our security teams, rebalance our allocation of resources more directly towards supply chain risk. Too many of our security leaders kind of build their team based on the model that they inherited 15 years ago or the model they grew up with in an organization. And so we're very heavily focused on securing our own environment. But what we've seen in a number of the recent significant breaches is that the problem for the company was not its own environment. It was its SaaS apps. It was its third-party partners. And so we have to step back and we need to invest a lot more in how we secure and manage the risk around the third parties that we are trusting. And so for me, it starts with number one, we need to map who all of those third parties are. It's shocking how hard that is to do in this world where you have shadow IT and you have people running out and deploying new software and using new data storage tools constantly. The security team has to stay on top of that, and it's not just mapping what are all of them, but understanding the differences in risks. If you're implementing a tool, but you're not giving it any of your sensitive data and you're not giving it privileged access into your environment, maybe you only have to look at it once a year. But if it's a very sensitive context, you've got to invest more in it. And it's not enough. Like on the people side in our security organizations, I find that we too often ask our GRC team, our governance, risk, and compliance folks, to own third-party risk. They can't own it by themselves. they need to be partnering with the more technical engineering side of the security organization and the incident response people. I think that the last thing I would say in terms of a strategy is you need to think about, what if this supplier gets compromised? Do I have the logs? Do I have the contact information? Do I have contractual terms that require them to update me as soon as they have an incident? And then what sense of control do I have in that incident? How can my team actively assist in our defense if the compromise is in that third-party environment?
I think those are very good points, and kind of leads, I think you've kind of answered a little bit of what you would recommend as the top 3 practices, especially as a former CISO. You've kind of touched upon those. I'm going to jump to another question for you, Joe. How do you ensure that smaller vendors in the supply chain who may not have the same, resources as large partners, how do you help them meet the necessary security and compliance standards?
Yeah, this is a really promising new trend. It used to be that we would kind of look at smaller vendors and just say, sorry, we're not going to use you because you're small, because you don't have a large security team, because you haven't invested as much as us. I think the US government's taken a bit of a leadership role in that, in terms of imposing standards on all of those kind of smaller vendors, asking them to do things like get FedRAMP certified, requiring companies to start thinking about their commitment to security much earlier in the kind of growth of the company. And so a lot of us, if we put our money where our security desire is, we can influence those smaller companies to prioritize security. We can also partner with them and talk to them about ways that they can do a better job. We shouldn't just write them off, but we also shouldn't just trust them. We have to engage with them and push them, and only trust them with our sensitive crown jewels if we believe that they meet that minimum standard that we expect of ourselves.
Sure. And, speaking of that important partnership, Sam, how do you see BreachLock playing a role in helping CISOs establish a robust security program for its supply chain and third-party vendors?
Right. So we have a lot of CISOs that have kind of made a move, up the maturity matrix in terms of, measuring their third-party risk, right? Like I said, you can't improve something you can't measure. In fact, you can't even act upon something that isn't measured. And think about it like, what's happening in your house, but how do you know what's happening in the second neighbor's house, the third neighbor's house, the fourth neighbor's house, right? And like I said, the hacks that I've studied, they've gone up to the tier 4 suppliers, right? Now, coming back to, how we could really look at this is that you have to look at it from 2 angles. And one is that you have to look at it from your internal assessment perspective, but also from an external assessment perspective. And in fact, while Joe was speaking about what CISOs could do, one of the facets that I was thinking about listening to him was that, a lot of times we are always thinking about this problem as 2 boxes, right? One is, okay, this is my house, and this is the other guy's house, right? And if those houses are interconnected, of course, the hackers are going to get in, right? But you also have to remember that if it's a third-party supplier, that same supplier is serving probably 100 other large suppliers, right? And if you would go back and look at the hacking statistics, the impact of these hacks have not been the same on all of these supplier relationships. And the reason for that is people oftentimes don't kind of discount the fact that, okay, we can't force the supplier to up their defenses. At max, we would ask them for a SOC 2, for a ISO 27001. You can't go really deep into their organization and say, show me your audit reports, because sometimes these SaaS contracts that Joe's referring to are like 10 grands or 20 grands or 30 grands, right? There's the cost benefit analysis is off. So what do you do practically, right? A simple example of that could be you could segment your network, right? So the part of data that this little supplier has access to, if you have a risk profile with a third-party risk register where you can break this down, then you can limit, the impact of something going wrong. Because I'm pretty much with what Joe said in his previous answer, right? You can't really stop this anymore. This is only going to get bigger, right? Because there are, and you should not, like the US government is promoting, they're doing the right thing, right? Because if you look at WhatsApp, at one time that was a very small company. Skype started very small, and these are systems that we use. Facebook was born in a dorm room, right? So there's no point using security as a disenabler and kind of killing the innovation spree. There's ways that also larger companies should look, okay, how can I take advantage of this innovation and limit my own risk, right? So I thought that was a very important anecdote that Joe came up with in terms of how it's expanding and what people can do. But as a practitioner, I think of these small ideas that we can implement, and why can't we just limit the risk instead of making a 50-page questionnaire and sending 5 audit teams to this 20-people company that we know is not going to have the security controls that you as a large bank have, right? So I find that really interesting.
Yeah, and I think your point about just the impact that it can have, I mean, all we need to do is take a look at Change Healthcare this year and the impact that it had, all over the United States and healthcare companies. It was a severe impact. And it kind of leads me a question that just came in, and I'm going to throw this over to you, Joe. It says, how can organizations assess and prioritize risks posed by critical suppliers, like a Change Healthcare, in a complex multi-tiered supply chain?
Yeah, this is a really important point, I think. We have a tendency as security teams to think about security as prevention or detection, but we also need to invest equally in mitigation. And so we have to go through the exercise of thinking through the worst case scenarios. We've gotten good at doing that in some contexts, like ransomware, because of the reality of it. But I'm not sure we've done enough of that in the supply chain risk context, because everybody talks about the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, but the third one is availability. And so we as security leaders need to think about not just protecting the data, but systems going down. And so if a supplier is a critical supplier of ours, we need to think through, if they go down, not just how do we protect confidentiality of the data, but how do we make sure that our business keeps operating? And that means you have to have backups in your supply chain. You have to have thought through and done role playing of, okay, what if this critical provider goes down? Like, clearly, a lot of the organizations in healthcare hadn't gone far enough in preparing for losing the support of Change Healthcare. And so when Change went down to their ransomware attack, everybody else did not have a plan B that they could immediately switch over to.
Yeah, it's that defense in depth. What is the default there? Next question, and then once we take this, I'm going to ask both of you for your last thoughts on the subject matter today. But Seemant, you mentioned this about costs and balancing costs, and how can businesses affect balancing the cost of cybersecurity measures with the operational need to ensure supply chain resilience and vendor diversification?
Yeah, I think there are many tools available in the market today. If you talk about attack surface management or third-party risk, there are a lot of tools that you could use to kind of know what your attack surface is and what your first tier, second tier, third tier, fourth tier, supplier risk is. And it's not that this is going to be a deep dive measurement of everything, but it'll definitely scratch the surface for you. And once you have that little measure, that's where you can start to see how to strike the cost benefit analysis balance, right? In terms of, because the effort, like I said previously, it's a two-way street. It's how much money you would want to spend to investigate, and it's how much money your supplier can spend, right? And the risk attached to it, and the dollar value of that contract, right? So although I might argue with myself that the dollar value today is not that important, because it could also be a 10 grand contract, which would lead to a catastrophic hack in any company, right? So I think, and the first key there is that we need to scratch the surface and at least have some amount of measurement. And then when you pin it to the risk that's attached with the exposure that you have with that supplier, that's where you can start really putting the cost drivers. And like I said, again, cost drivers are on both sides. It's not just the money that they would spend to up their defenses. It's also how much money you would spend to kind of monitor and gauge their defenses. Do you want to look at it every quarter, or is 1 year check going to justify the risk that you have in your risk register, right? So it's a complex topic. I don't think, I agree with Joe that we haven't solved this puzzle completely. And also, fortunately or unfortunately, it's only going to get more complex, as we kind of be a part of this movement where our world is expanding, and endlessly so.
Yeah, and I agree. And as we close and come near the mark, I think we're up on 30 minutes here. I'm going to ask each of you, just for some closing remarks, what would you like to leave our viewers with to kind of really understand what's happening with the supply chain risk and what they can do? And I'll start with you, Joe. Any closing remarks?
Yeah, there's thinking through everything we've covered so far. There's just one topic that I want to leave people with that we haven't touched on really directly yet, and that's making your third-party security program real time, not point in time. And what I mean is that too often companies will assess a vendor or third party at the time that you initiate the contractual relationship and you start and kind of connect your technologies together. And then a slightly better team goes back and looks once a year and reevaluates the risk. That's not good enough. Risk evolves constantly. Technology degrades constantly. And so we have to find ways to be testing and validating trust in our third parties in real time. And that means we have to rely on tools. People, like, we can't build a big enough security team to have people checking all of our vendors every day, but we can use software tools. And in the world that we're in right now, the way artificial intelligence is being integrated into our different security tools, we can do real-time risk assessments for our most important vendors on a daily basis. And that's the direction we need to be going. If you're just doing questionnaires, reading through it once, putting in a digital folder and forgetting about it for 364 days, you're not doing it well enough. It's got to be a real-time thing.
I agree. And thank you, Joe. And Seemant, any last closing remarks from you?
Yeah, so, and for me, I think it's very important for the audience to take away that, one, they need to measure the supplier risk. We are in 2025 very soon. So if you're not measuring your supplier risk, it's not, you're not in the right time frame. You're behind, right? So we need to start measuring supplier risk. And I agree with Joe that we need to get into real-time measurement of risk when it comes to suppliers, right? The second thing is to not undermine the impact of software supply chain, right? If you've got libraries, if you've got open source, software bill of materials in your supply chain, this is coming from open source, and not open source has the same level of trust or security that as you might think. So, there needs to be a focus on open source supply chain. From a software perspective. And third is, like I said, don't always put the blame on your suppliers. They got hacked, and therefore we got hacked. That's not a good approach, because yes, they got hacked, but there were 5 other suppliers that were connected to them, or 5 other, large banks, or the Walmarts of the world were connected, but they didn't get hacked. You did. That's because you didn't segment your network, or you forgot about this X, Y, or Z control that was very easy. So I also want to kind of encourage our CISO community to look at it from a different lens, and not always say that, hey, because this was a 4th tier hack, this company got hacked, so it's the 4th tier supplier to blame. The truth lies on both sides. And there could be not that I'm justifying it, but, maybe the 4th tier supplier did not have enough resources to kind of buy the defenses that you have. And for you, a network segmentation control was something that you could easily implement, considering the amount of firewalls you've bought, right? In fact, I'll leave you with a very practical anecdote. And one of the assessments that I was a part of, we were looking at public reports of a company, right? Just to draw a parallel on how wide this could be and what you could do to protect yourselves, right? So there was a public company that was publishing annual results, right? And if you go to that annual result, that's a PDF, okay? And that PDF is not built by or not finalized in the company that the public results are published for. It was done in a printer company, a company that was only printing the results for shareholders to read during the AGM. And these footprints were recorded in the properties of that PDF, right? And now a hacker could simply target this large company, knowing that this is the printer company. And you guess what? A printer company is not like SpaceX, so they aren't going to have the extraordinary IT know-how or security controls that you can imagine. I mean, they're into still reading business, like offline reading business, right? So it's aspects like this, and it's not just everybody knows that printing company is not going to have controls. I think it's for the larger companies to think how they approach the topic of supply chain. Are they looking at their software? Are they looking at these little suppliers? Are they measuring their risks? So it's like a cohesive approach that you need to take to this topic. So, there's no magic wand that me or Joe could wave today and say, hey, supply risk is now handled. I think it's a cohesive approach, and we all need to approach it like a community, and that's how we can solve it.
Terrific. Couldn't agree more, Seemant, and thank you for making some great points. So that concludes our webcast today on third-party and supply chain risks. I'd like to thank all of you who attended, and a big thank you to our guest speakers, Seemant Sehgal and Joe Sullivan. Thank you so much. Please note this webcast will be made available on demand at breachlock.com after the airing. And if you'd like more information about BreachLock, please wait for the closing, and we will provide more information on how to contact us. Thank you, everyone, and thanks to our guest speakers.